Prepare to dive into the darkest, censored secrets of history that traditional books refuse to tell in detail. The heroic image of William Wallace, immortalized in cinema, is a monumental fraud that hides a truth so brutal and shocking that it will corrode your perception of human cruelty and state vengeance. Wallace's execution was not simply an act of royal justice. It was a meticulously orchestrated spectacle of terror by King Edward I to annihilate not just a man, but a symbol, a legend. And the execution was so viscerally horrifying, so beyond comprehension, that it's hard even to hear. Imagine being dragged naked for miles, hanged but not to death disemboweled, and burned alive before your own eyes, with your entrails shown to you while you still breathe. All for a crime that was not a crime, defending his own land and freedom. But the controversy doesn't end there. Was Wallace truly a traitor, as the English crown claimed, or was the real traitor Robert the Bruce, who abandoned him to die? And what about the myth that his body was quartered and sent to the four corners of Scotland as a macabre warning? In this video, we will unravel the layers of propaganda and reveal the true face of Wallace's sacrifice. A story of pure agony and determination that goes far beyond the cry of freedom. If you are a lover of real history, the kind that isn't sanitized for mass consumption, you cannot miss this account. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. YouTube's algorithm favors channels with an active and subscribed community, and each new subscription is a vote of confidence that helps us bring deeper, well-researched content, freeing us from superficial and mainstream topics. If you want historical truth to continue being uncovered, your subscription is essential. And if you can support the channel more directly, consider using super thanks on this video. Every contribution is a green light for us to invest in more research, visual resources, and access to exclusive historical archives, ensuring that the quality and rigor you deserve remain a priority. If that's not possible, no problem at all. Leave in the comments the fact that shocked or surprised you the most in this story. Your interaction is equally valuable. But above all, make sure you watch until the absolute end of this video, because the final revelation, taken from an obscure 14th century document, will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the final fate of William Wallace's body and will leave you truly stunned. The truth awaits. To truly understand the flame of freedom that ignited William Wallace's heart and transformed him into the most wanted and feared man by the powerful English army, we must go back in time and dive into his childhood and adolescence. A dark and turbulent era that forged his character of steel. Wallace was not born in a vacuum. He was a direct product of the brutal oppression Scotland suffered at the hands of King Edward I, known as Malcolm the Lame or Hammer of the Scots, a man whose ambition knew no bounds. Imagine growing up in a land where foreign soldiers patrol your own villages, impose absurd laws, and treat your people with profound disdain. All because your nation was left without a strong king after the death of Alexander III, and Edward I saw this power vacuum as the perfect opportunity to enforce his domination. It was in this cauldron of national indignity that young William became a man. Contrary to what cinema sometimes portrays, Wallace was not a poor peasant, but rather the son of a laird, a minor noble landowner in Elderslie. This gave him access to a better education than most of his compatriots, likely including proficiency in Latin and French, as well as early training in the arts of war and strategy, skills that would later prove invaluable. But his real education came from the streets and the fields, witnessing firsthand the cruelty of the English occupiers. Stories from the time, though sometimes shrouded in the mists of legend, speak of traumatic incidents that marked the young man forever, such as the murder of his father and brother by English soldiers during a skirmish, an event that planted in his heart a deep hatred and a desire for justice. Another powerful story, though its historical accuracy is debated, is that of his beloved Marion Braveheart being harassed and subsequently murdered by the English Sheriff of Lanark, William de Hazelrig, as a warning to Wallace himself. Whether strictly factual or not, this narrative perfectly captures the climate of constant humiliation and arbitrary violence that the Scots endured, where even love and family were not safe from the brutality of the oppressor. Every insult, every extortionate tax, every act of violence that Wallace witnessed or personally suffered was another hammer blow on the anvil that shaped his unshakable determination. His youth was not, therefore, a time of carefree innocence, but rather a long and painful lesson on the cost of submission and the absolute value of freedom. He did not wake up one day deciding to be a hero. He was forced into that position by the inexorable tide of history and the injustice that surrounded him, transforming his personal rage into a greater national purpose, becoming the voice and the fist of a people who refuse to be forgotten. The personal life of William Wallace is one of those historical topics that almost inseparably blends legend and reality, creating a profoundly human and emotional narrative about the man behind the national hero. Unlike the image of a solitary, untouchable warrior, Wallace had a heart that beat strongly for love, family, and friends. And it is these connections that often hold the true key to understanding his relentless fury against English oppression. The central figure in this intimate drama is undoubtedly Marion Braveheart, also known as Murron in some adaptations. Marion's historical existence is debated among scholars, but the overwhelming persistence of her story in Scottish oral tradition suggests a powerful truth behind the myth. Popular accounts tell of Wallace, then still a young man, engaging in a secret, forbidden romance with her in the town of Lanark. In the occupied Scotland of the 13th century, even love could be an act of rebellion, especially against odious rights imposed by English lords, such as the droit du seigneur. Tragedy struck when the English sheriff of Lanark, William de Heselrigge, learned of the affair and, seeing Wallace as an insurgent threat, moved to punish him in the cruelest way possible, by ordering Marion's capture and summary execution. This catastrophic event was not just a devastating personal loss. It was the spark that ignited the fire of vengeance. Grief turned into direct action, leading Wallace to return to Lanark with a group of loyal men, kill Heselrigge, and burn the local garrison, an act that effectively marked the explosive public beginning of his rebellion. Beyond this great tragic love, blood ties were equally fundamental to Wallace. He was the son of Sir Malcolm Wallace, a knight and minor noble, laird, of Elderslie, and brother to Malcolm and John. History recounts that his father and brother were killed in skirmishes with English forces, fueling a deep hatred and desire for justice that built layer by layer from his youth. This network of family loyalty was his initial safe harbor, but his most strategic and complex relationships were those of warrior companionship. His partnership with Sir Andrew de Moray, another fearless noble leading the resistance in the north, was crucial. It was this alliance of mutual respect and common purpose that led to the overwhelming victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. The trust between them was so strong that, after the battle, both were named Guardians of Scotland. Moray's death from wounds sustained at Stirling was another heavy blow to Wallace, leaving him more isolated in command. And this is where the most complicated and politically charged bonds come in. His relationship with the Scottish nobility, especially Robert the Bruce. While the film Braveheart portrays an epic romance between Wallace and the French Princess Isabella, this is a pure dramatic invention with no factual basis. In reality, his interaction with the aristocracy was one of mutual distrust. Many nobles viewed Wallace, a man of minor nobility, not an earl or baron, as an upstart, a dangerous rival, and an audacious commoner. Wallace, in turn, distrusted their wavering loyalty, as many of them switched sides with the shifting political winds. The final betrayal at the Battle of Falkirk, where several Scottish nobles, possibly including Bruce himself, are believed to have withdrawn their forces from the battlefield, sealing Wallace's defeat, epitomizes the fragility of these political loyalties. In the end, William Wallace's personal life was marked by a series of deep connections broken by the violence of his time. the loss of his beloved, the death of his family, and the betrayal of his allies. These relationships were not mere footnotes in his biography. They were the emotional forge that created one of the greatest symbols of freedom the world has ever seen. William Wallace's rise from a wanted man to Guardian of Scotland is one of the most meteoric and fascinating trajectories in medieval history. But it's crucial to understand that it wasn't built on battlefield bravery alone. It was a masterclass in political and psychological strategy, a veritable strategy of terror, aimed at both the English and the Scottish nobility itself. After his act of personal vengeance in Lanark, Wallace didn't simply disappear into the Highlands. He realized his struggle needed to transform from a localized rebellion into a national movement. To achieve this, he needed two things: to prove the English could be defeated, and more importantly, to force the wavering Scottish nobles to choose a side. The decisive victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge was his calling card to the world. By annihilating a larger, better-equipped English army using the terrain to his advantage and the enemy's impetuosity, Wallace didn't just win a battle. He gained an aura of invincibility and became a living symbol of hope for the common Scotsman. This victory earned him the authority to be named Guardian of Scotland, a monumental title for someone of no royal blood. A shocking and controversial fact for the time that directly challenged the established feudal order. It was in the aftermath of this victory that his most controversial strategy unfolded. Wallace led a massive raid into northern England, an unprecedented act of retaliation. His campaigns through Northumberland and Cumbria were marked by calculated ferocity. Villages were pillaged and burned, fields destroyed, and terror was deliberately spread. To many, this might seem like mere barbarism, but in reality, it was a deeply astute military and political strategy. On one hand, it was economic warfare, depriving the English of resources and funding his own cause. On the other, it was a brutal psychological message to King Edward I. You may try to subdue us, but we can bring hell to your doorstep and retaliate in kind. However, the most important audience for this show of force wasn't just Edward. It was his own countrymen, the reluctant Scottish nobility, who always viewed Wallace with a mix of disdain and envy as an upstart, without lineage, now had to contend with a man who not only defeated the English on the battlefield, but dared to bring the war to the heart of England itself, something many of them never dared to do. This strategy of terror was, therefore, a dual struggle for legitimacy. Against the English, to prove Scotland was a sovereign and fearsome force, and internally, to force recognition of his leadership and show that the old aristocratic guard, which so often wavered and negotiated with the enemy, was obsolete. He wasn't just fighting with swords, he was fighting with symbols. Every fire set on English soil was a symbol that a new kind of power, born from popular will and pure audacity, had arrived to challenge the established order, both within and beyond Scotland. Imagine the scene. William Wallace is at the peak of his power. After the resounding victory at Stirling Bridge, he was not just a hero to the common people. He was the Guardian of Scotland, the man who had humiliated the world's most powerful army and ignited the heart of a nation. But it is precisely at the mountain top that the air is thinnest and the fall, if it comes, is most devastating. The first sign of trouble came not from the English, but from his own comrades. The Scottish nobility, those blue-blooded lords in imposing castles, never truly saw Wallace as an equal. They viewed him as an aravista, a common man who, through his own merit and bravery, had reached a position that, in their understanding, belonged only by birthright. This latent disdain created a crack in the foundation of the Scottish resistance, a crack that Edward I of England, the astute and relentless hammer of the Scots, would masterfully exploit. The decisive Battle of Falkirk in 1298 was not lost solely due to English tactical superiority or the deadly Welsh longbows. It was lost to betrayal. In the heat of the crucial moment, as the charge of the English heavy cavalry approached, the hearts of many Scottish nobles, including that of Robert the Bruce himself, wavered. The withdrawal of Bruce's cavalry from the battlefield was not a simple act of cowardice, but a brutal and devastating political calculation. For Bruce, Scotland's future perhaps seemed safer in the hands of an ambitious king than in those of a man of the people whose success overshadowed everyone around him. Wallace, left alone on the field with his infantry, watched the collapse of everything he had fought for. The defeat was crushing, a bloodbath that claimed thousands of lives and shattered the spirit of invincibility he had built. His resignation from the title of Guardian was the solitary act of a man carrying the weight of thousands of dead on his shoulders. The years that followed were a silent, agonizing descent into obscurity and solitude. The national hero became a fugitive, a ghost hunted both by agents of King Edward, who offered a fortune for his head, and by the bitter awareness that the unity he thought he had built was a fragile illusion. Every shadow could hide a spy. Every outstretched hand could be that of a traitor. Wallace's loneliness was not just physical. It was profoundly political and emotional. He, who had inspired multitudes, now trusted only a handful of loyal followers. His journey to France in search of allies was an act of desperation by a man with nothing left to lose. A final strategic move in a game that had almost completely turned against him. And the final blow, his capture near Glasgow in 1305, was the cherry on top of this tragedy. Widely believed to have been orchestrated by a Scottish noble, Sir John de Menteith, showing that betrayal was not a ghost of the past, but a constant and voracious presence. These difficult moments paint the portrait not of an invincible superhero, but of a profoundly human man who faced desertion, crushing defeat, and the bitter price of solitude with a resilience that, in many ways, is even more admirable than any of his victories on the battlefield. His trial in London was far more than a mere legal proceeding. It was a political theater carefully choreographed by King Edward I, designed not to uncover the truth, but to publicly humiliate, degrade, and destroy the symbol of Scottish resistance. Imagine the scene. It was the morning of August 23, 1305, in the Great Hall of Westminster, an immense and oppressive place filled with expectant English dignitaries, all eager to see the man who had defied their powerful king. Wallace was brought in chains, probably exhausted and marked by his long months of flight and captivity, yet by all accounts, unshaken and possessing a quiet dignity that must have been deeply irritating to his captors. He was placed on a raised platform, a kind of defendant's dock, so everyone could see the outlaw about to get his due. The charges were read aloud, a long list of atrocities and the supreme crime, treason against the English crown. The procedure was a farce from the start. Wallace had no right to a defender, could not call witnesses, and the outcome had been decided before he even entered the room. The true aim of this spectacle was not a trial, but the public confession and submission that Edward I so desperately wanted. However, what the king and his judges did not anticipate was the magnificent and courageous defense Wallace would mount. When given the chance to speak, he did not deny his actions, beg for mercy, or try to negotiate for his life. Instead, he made the most powerful and philosophically profound statement of his life, a phrase that would echo through the centuries and solidify his legacy forever. He looked at his judges and, with unshakable clarity, declared, "I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject." This simple sentence was a masterstroke of rhetoric and politics. It was a total rejection of Edward's authority over Scotland and over his own person. In Wallace's mind, and under the law he recognized, treason was a crime that could only be committed by someone who owed loyalty to a king. Wallace argued that as a free-born Scotsman who had never sworn fealty to Edward, his fight was a legitimate defense of his homeland against a foreign aggressor and usurper. He was not a traitor. He was a captured soldier, a patriot. This statement instantly transformed him from a mere defendant into an accuser, exposing the illegitimate nature of the trial itself in the eyes of many. Of course, his logic was immediately rejected by the court, which found him guilty in an instant. The verdict was predictable. He was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, the horrific and ritualistic punishment reserved for traitors. But even upon receiving his death sentence, Wallace did not break. Legends say that his supposed last words, before losing consciousness on the gallows, were a final whisper of freedom. Although historians debate the literal truth of this, the cry perfectly encapsulates the spirit of his final defense. Wallace's trial, in its attempt to destroy him, achieved the exact opposite. His quiet courage and his refusal to submit, even in the face of a horrific death, ensured that he would not die a criminal, but a martyr. His defense was not meant to save his own life. That was an impossible mission, but to defend the cause of an entire nation. And in that, he triumphed in a way Edward I could never have imagined. The legacy of William Wallace today is a vibrant and powerful tapestry, weaving together history, legend, and national identity into an enduring symbol of courage and freedom. More than 700 years after his brutal death, Wallace is not a dusty relic of the past, but a living, pulsating presence in the heart of Scotland and the imagination of the world. His journey from man to myth began the very moment his body was dismembered by order of King Edward I, an act intended to erase his name and terrorize anyone who dared follow him, but which ironically forged his legend indelibly. Each part of his body sent to the four corners of Scotland was not a warning, but a seed planted in fertile soil, germinating into a sense of national unity and resistance that Robert the Bruce, once a wavering ally, knew how to harness to finally secure Scottish independence at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Today, Wallace is the unofficial patron of Scottish freedom, a hero who transcends time and becomes accessible to all who fight against oppression, wherever they may be. The magnificent and imposing National Wallace Monument, erected in the 19th century atop Abbey Craig near Stirling, is the most tangible monument to his memory. A grand structure standing precisely where he commanded his troops in the epic Battle of Stirling Bridge, offering a stunning view and an opportunity for deep reflection on one man's sacrifice for his homeland. The statue of Wallace carved on the facade of Edinburgh Castle, with his legendary Claymore sword firmly gripped, looks sternly over the capital, an eternal guard and a silent reminder of the price of freedom. His influence permeates popular culture, most famously immortalized in Mel Gibson's film Braveheart, which, despite its historical inaccuracies, catapulted Wallace's story to a global audience, galvanizing interest in Scottish history and tourism. Thousands of visitors now make pilgrimages each year to sites associated with his life. Scots and admirers from around the world visit these places not merely as tourists, but almost as pilgrims, touching the ancient stones and feeling a connection to a narrative of incredible resilience. Wallace is more than a name in a history book. He is a feeling, a spirit of stubborn determination that echoes in the Scottish accent, in traditional music evoking battles and loss, and in modern political debates about the nation's identity and future. He is a universal icon, invoked whenever an underdog rises against a giant, whenever a people yearns for self-determination. His famous declaration at his trial, "I could not be a traitor, for I owed him no allegiance," resonates through the centuries as a fundamental principle of sovereignty and personal integrity. In every Scottish flag raised, in every anthem sung, a part of William Wallace is present, alive and well, not as a ghost, but as the very essence of a proud people who never forget their heroes. His true legacy lies not only in the stone and steel of monuments, but in the indomitable spirit he embodies, a legacy that continues to inspire generations to believe in the cause of freedom, no matter how great the opponent may seem. He is, and always will be, the brave heart of Scotland. I hope this immersion into the behind-the-scenes of history has been as impactful for you as it was for me while researching. Recounting the life and especially the sacrifice of Wallace isn't about celebrating violence, but about honoring the unbelievable price one man paid for an ideal greater than himself, the freedom of a people. The truth no matter how horrible, always deserves to be told. And if this video made you see history in a new light, if it added value to your day, then the mission was accomplished. To help me continue this work of bringing deep, well-researched content to you, please leave a like below. This simple gesture is crucial for the YouTube algorithm to recognize this as quality content and recommend it to more people. And of course, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because our community of curious minds is what keeps this project alive and growing. I really want to know your opinion. Leave a comment telling me which fact or moment from this story shocked or surprised you the most. Your interaction is what makes this channel a vibrant space for sharing. And now, if you've become captivated by this story of courage and resilience, I have an unmissable suggestion. The video appearing on screen right now is even more interesting and captivating than this one. In it, we explore another historical figure whose journey is equally thrilling and full of twists you won't want to miss. Head over there to continue our conversation, and I'll wait for you in the next video. See you soon!